Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Advisor with Stacey Chillemi. And today I'm very excited because we have our very special guest. It's Raina Gandhi, and she is part of our podcast community. She has her own podcast on our channel, and she helps women and she helps them in all different areas, whether it comes to the workforce or whether it comes to helping themselves eternally. She is an excellent coach, and I'm so glad that she is part of our podcast community. Now, today she's going to talk about the inner critic within us. And I think that's such an important topic because sometimes we could be our own worst enemies when it comes to our inner critic. And today she's going to tell you and show you different ways to overcome that and how to become the best version of yourself. So Raina, it's so good to have you on the show. I love when you come on the show. You are just an amazing woman and you have so many amazing qualities and your coaching is phenomenal. And I'm just so glad you're here today. Tell everybody a little about yourself, and then I want to hear about working on your own inner critic because so many people are full of self-doubt. We tend to be our own worst critics, and that could really hold us back in life, especially if you want to reach your full potential and make your dreams a reality. So tell everybody a little about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, first of all, Stacey, for having me again. I always love to come on your show, and I always learn a lot too. So thanks for the great, engaging conversations always. Um, my name is Raina Gandhi, as Stacey mentioned. I am a women-centered coach, so I support women in the workforce who want to thrive and stay in the workforce and do well in their careers and move up the career ladder or make sure that they get the money that they're worth, advocate for themselves, work on their inner critic, work on the imposter syndrome, all the things in terms of group coaching. I do individual coaching. I do coaching with early career, mid career, C suite as well. So, all the things.
Now, tell us about the inner critic because we all, like I just mentioned, we could be our worst critics, and explain to everybody what the inner critic is first of all.
Yeah, sure. So, when we think about the inner critic, if we take a step back and we think about self talk, right? Just in general, it's this endless stream of these unspoken thoughts. It's that dialogue in your mind. It's how we communicate with ourselves, and that, of course, is going to play a major role in how we experience the world around us, right?
Mhm.
So that means that self talk is going to be really important. And in the short term, self talk is very logical. It can be very reasonable, but it can also come from areas of misconception and having less information than you think you have.
Yeah.
And we've all experienced positive and negative messages, right? But we've heard from the outside world about ourselves that we've internalized. Um, if you think back to your childhood, sometimes we have a supportive or hypercritical caregiver. We could have an empathetic friend or a bully. And of course, there's the media, right? That's a whole other source. So these patterns can stem from childhood experiences, or they can be rooted in societal norms, or sometimes in some expectations, peer pressure, past failures, emotional scars, all different kinds of incidents. And so the self talk is that positive and negative, and then the inner critic, the negative self talk, is the one that is critical and harsh and not necessarily always true. And so oftentimes what we say is the negative self talk comes from three C's: comparing, criticizing, and complaining, right? So
Mhm.
if you think about it, we can take comparing first.
Right.
The more we compare ourselves to others, the less value you sometimes have for yourself, right? So
Right.
you're thinking you're comparing one or two aspects, but your insight sometimes is so limited and your awareness in other people's lives is so limited, right? Especially with social media. And we know this. Um, but yet we do the comparison because we're comparing what we see, but there's just so much more to it. So it's a zero sum game. Then when you criticize yourself, you're engaging in self judgment, right? And you're actively putting yourself down. You're being unfair, and this again impacts your self worth. So that expression, it's in your head. you may be making up this narrative based on some, again, prior message maybe you were told when you were in your childhood, but it may not even relate to your current situation, right? So
Right.
you compare yourself to others, you criticize your own self, and then you complain. So your focus becomes on all the negative things that are happening in your life or in a specific situation. And it can be sometimes very difficult to move beyond that and to take steps to improve it. So when your inner critic is talking to you, when you're negatively talking to yourself, it's very challenging to step away from that. And then if you take that step further, um, you can stop and think about sort of also where the inner critic presents itself from, right? So
Right.
maybe you're filtering, maybe you're magnifying some negative ways in which self-talk or a harsh critic presents itself. So um, you're trying to save money, but you go over budget, right? So
Mhm.
you're looking at your budget and you get caught up on that and you lose sight of the fact that you already put away X number of dollars in your savings, right? But you're
Right.
focused on what you didn't do.
Right.
That Right, what you didn't, that you went over budget, but not the savings part. So what ends up happening is your accomplishments, doesn't matter how big they are, doesn't matter how small they are, they tend to outweigh that negative. And what this means is that when people say you look at your glass half full or half empty, you're seeing the positive things, you're going to be more rewarded. You're going to have a different mindset than if you're filtering and you're jotting down all the things that are not going well for you. But what you're not realizing is things are not always as bad as you seem, as you think. But if you're always going to be looking at the negative, that's what you're going to see, right?
Right.
Sometimes, so filtering is an example. Another example would be personalizing. When something bad occurs, right? You blame yourself despite any evidence. So let's say there's a group chat and everyone's taking longer than usual to respond. This happened to me the other day. I sent something out and nobody was responding. And I thought, wait, what's going on? Why isn't anyone responding? Right? It happens to all of us. And you start thinking, is everyone, did I do something? Is everyone annoyed with me?
Yeah.
Do they not want to hang out? Are they just too busy? Or did I say something? Did I do something? But is there any evidence that's really going to support that thought? Um, when you take a step back and you challenge yourself, and that's exactly what I did, is the thought factual or is this stuff that I'm interpreting in my own head?
Right.
So, as soon as I did that, I was like, okay, no, I don't want to go down that path because I'm making up stories in my own head, and that really doesn't help anybody. Then another way it presents is in catastrophizing, right? So you're automatically going to assume the worst scenario. So let's say you're in New York City, you're on your way to work, and the subway stops underground. Happens all the time, right?
Right.
Then what's the first thought? Oh gosh, what if I'm stuck here for hours? I'm going to be stuck here for hours. Um, and if your brain goes down that path, instead of thinking it's a solid subway, it's a train, is it really going to be stuck for hours? Probably not. It's the New York City subway system. They're pretty well equipped to fix whatever mechanical issues or other issues pretty quickly because they know they have to get people to work. They know that people depend on them. And so, is it likely that I'm going to be here for a couple of hours? Probably not. So again, taking instead of catastrophizing, taking a step back and saying, okay, what's really happening here?
Right.
And then there's the polarizing piece, which is things seem either really good or really bad. If you're not perfect, you're a complete failure. And there's very little middle ground. So, an example of this might be um, you've been getting up early every single day this week. And one morning, you're just exhausted and you just want to hit the snooze button, right? Um, all of a sudden you're like, well, now I'm so lazy. Like I've been getting up all week and now I'm not getting up. And so the remedy for that is really to treat yourself with kindness and to reassure yourself that you're only human. There are going to be times that you're just going to need to sleep in. Just like some days we're really hungry, we eat more. Some days we're less hungry, we eat less.
Right.
Um, and so our bodies are going to be telling us different things on different days, right? So
Yeah.
um, it really, so there's the inner critic shows up, that negative self-talk shows up, but so much of it is identifying, okay, how is it showing up? Am
Yes.
I polarizing? Am I catastrophizing? What am I doing with this? And then how can I change that narrative? So just really figuring out what you can tell yourself. Maybe you can give yourself a positive affirmation. Um, Maybe you're used to thinking the negative, but you catch yourself and you challenge what is actually factual here.
Yes. Those are great pieces of advice. I find that a lot of people that I speak with, professionals, they tend to self-doubt themselves. Even when, and I find that in a lot of women too, is that they tend to be so harsh on themselves, that inner critic that, and they doubt themselves when they have so much to give and they have so much knowledge, so much talent, but yet they are so hard on themselves. And that kind of pushes them back because when you're so hard on yourself and you're so critical of everything you do, you're instead of elevating yourself to the next level, you are pushing yourself backwards because you're being so critical. And like you said, we're human. Some of the most successful people have failed time and time again. It's okay to be, to constructively, think of, oh, I did this okay, but I could have did it better. But don't knock yourself to the ground because, we learn from experience. We shouldn't be so critical of ourselves and we should just say, you know what? I tried, I did the best I could with the situation that occurred. And next time I know better and I'll do it, I'll do it this way instead, and I think, really people have to try to get over, being so critical of themselves. What are some ways that people can really start to learn how to not be so critical of themselves and not have, and be able to like focus more on, some of the things that they're doing that is making them thrive instead of being so critical on the things that are that they don't think in their head is perfect or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. So I think if you want to break free from that negative self talk, it really helps to recognize from the different forms of the inner critic what's really, where is the self criticism coming from, right? So it's like having a cheat sheet that's going to intercept that self criticism before it starts to take over. So self awareness is really important. It helps challenge any kind of unhelpful thought patterns and starts to replace them with more constructive thoughts, right? So some strategies might be identifying that negative self talk and then what's that change that's going to have to happen that's damaging that internal narrative, right? So
Mhm.
maybe keep a thought or gratitude journal. That's like a detective's notebook in a sense.
Yeah.
It's like a detective's notebook for your mind, right? So you're
Yeah.
logging your thoughts, you're identifying what sets off your negative self talk, you're understanding any kind of triggers that are happening, any patterns that are happening. It's going to help you equip yourself to build strategies that are going to counter them. And people talk all the time about doing these journals, and some people love them, and some people just don't get started. I've never heard of somebody starting a journal, a gratitude journal, or any kind of journaling, and then say, oh, you know what, that was just a waste of time, or that was a bad idea.
Right.
So if you're going to go the gratitude journal route, even jotting down three things that you're grateful for can make a
Mhm.
really big difference in shifting that focus from that negativity, that catastrophizing, the polarizing, the extremes.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think journaling is a really big part of it. And then getting some kind of external validation also, right? If you talk to somebody that you trust,
Yeah.
um, that's going to help you recognize some of these negative patterns and show you, stop you in the moment, or talk to you about it later and say, here are the patterns that are showing up, and let's compare this to what the facts actually are, right?
Right.
So that's another way. And then another way could be um, just practicing mindfulness.
Yeah.
Take a step back. What are your thoughts? Instead of judging them, stay still, maybe focus on your breathing,
Hmm.
watch your thoughts, see what happens. They may be floating by, um, and give them like a mental thumbs up or thumbs down, right? So
Right.
you've got breath work, you've got calm, there you've got different apps. Um, and then there's also there's this idea of cognitive restructuring, right? So
Right.
you can try cognitive restructuring, which is going to question that inner critic. It's going to
Hmm.
try to help you determine if this belief is really grounded in reality or if
Yeah.
it's truly just your imagination. Um, I like to ask myself, and this is something that I've done really well for myself over the last couple of years that has worked. I ask myself, if my friend was dealing with the exact same thought or the exact same situation that I'm dealing with,
Right.
if she was wrestling with it, what would I tell her? And
Right.
instead of telling me what I think I'm going to tell myself, I would tell myself what I would tell her.
Hmm.
And when I started doing that, I started giving myself a lot more grace. And
Yeah.
I started paying attention, a lot more attention to how I was talking to myself. And so during those anxious moments, you're going to have this challenging thought, but what if you reframe it?
Yeah.
And you reframe it to something that's more balanced, something that's more positive, something
Hmm.
that's more mindful. And so I think that that helps as well. And then, of course, there's always the option of, if this is something that you find is debilitating, seeking professional help from counselors or therapists, it makes a big difference because it provides us that guidance that we need sometimes to help identify. If we're not able to identify some of these things ourselves, we
Hmm.
need that support. That's very common as well. So understanding what are your negative thought patterns, um, how is that negative self-talk causing or impacting your well-being? How is it impacting your mental health, really, right? So disarming that inner critic, learning how to disarm the inner critic, and practicing how to minimize that negative self-talk, and then having someone you can bounce the thoughts of, here's what I've been doing, what do you think, is also a good idea.
Right. I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. Now I found, when I have been working with a lot of clients, especially female clients that have gone through, struggling with being their own, worst enemy, when it
Yeah.
comes to being, their own, when it comes to self-criticism, it went back to their childhood. It went back to traumatic events, and a lot of times it went back to their childhood years, how they were raised, the things that were said to them. After a while they believed it, or if they weren't, if they worked really hard and, their parents didn't acknowledge their accomplishments, or they didn't give them the proper recognition, or they put them down instead of, praising them. When they got to being adults, they were their worst self critics because no matter what they did, they didn't think they were good enough because of the childhood years, the way they grew up, the way they were raised, the environment they came from played a humongous role in who they were today. So if you have, a dysfunctional family, or you came from an era where, you weren't treated the way you probably should have been treated, how do you get out of that cycle? How do you break that cycle so you can not be a self-critic, your own worst self-critic, but you could actually start commending yourself? Because when you've been told that you're not good enough your entire life, and then you grow up and you maybe become, a doctor or a lawyer or a businesswoman or entrepreneur, and you're doing well, but inside you feel like you're nothing. How do you get over that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and It's really hard because you're conditioned to think a certain way. This is a narrative that you've been told from an early age. And so, of course, you're going to start believing it, right? It's,
Mhm.
we talked about, I think I gave an example of being lazy. Like if you wake up at 10 a.m. on the weekends and your parents are like, it's 10 a.m. What's happening? Like, you should have been doing this, this, and this by now. You have all these chores to do. And, so you're lazy, and it's the name calling and all the things that comes with that. It's this harsh and very unfair judgment, and
Yeah.
of course it's going to impact our self-worth, right? So this idea again of it's in your head because this narrative is what you've been literally told
Yeah.
and made to feel like, but the words have also just come out,
Yeah.
and you've been told these things. And so I really feel that in order to change that narrative, one, recognizing that this is something that you've been told, you may have been told once, or maybe a bully said something to you. Sometimes there's an isolated incident. I don't know if this happens to you. If a bully bullied me about something in my childhood, I might remember that one isolated incident. It may not have happened ever again, but it was so impactful. And
Yeah.
somehow I carried that through, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so stopping and saying, okay, first of all, let's do some fact checking.
Yeah.
Is this really true? Like, am I lazy? Work i I work full time. I wake up early. I make time for exercise. I take the kids to school. Whatever it is that you do, right? There are
Yeah.
a million things that you do in your day. Lazy is not the word to describe you, right?
Right.
um and you know this, and
Hmm.
so it's really important to stop and fact check and say
Right.
how much of this is really true.
Right.
And then the other piece is acknowledging that what you were told wasn't true back then either.
Right.
It wasn't true back then, and it's not true now. If you choose to sleep in till 10 o'clock in the morning, listen, if you have small kids, you have no choice. You have to be up in the morning.
Yeah.
Life is going to present you with different things. There are going to be years of your life where you can sleep till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There are going to be
Right.
years of your life where you're going to be up at 6 a.m. That's how it is. Neither one makes you lazy or not lazy, right?
Right.
It's circumstantial. And then that just being kind to yourself
Yes.
and recognizing that this is what's happening is a big part of it. And then identifying, what are you doing? Are you personalizing? Are you catastrophizing? Are you polarizing? What are you doing, right? And
Right.
are you filtering? Which one is it? And what are some of the things that you can do? If you're filtering, maybe think of the positive side of that, right?
Hmm.
Instead of magnifying that negative piece of it. Um, I woke up at 10 o'clock. I woke up a little bit later, but in 3 hours, I accomplished seven things that if I had woken up at 7 o'clock, I would have
Yeah.
accomplished those seven things anyway, right?
Right.
Because I had to leave by such and such time and I had to get my work done. And so it's a lot of perspective. And
Hmm.
it's also a lot of blocking out what you know is not true.
Right.
And it just takes time and practice, really. But you have to make that effort.
Definitely. Definitely. So, what would you say, like, if you had to look at today's conversation, what are some of the big turning points? Like, what would be like, some of the main things you want people to recognize, and also, maybe go over the steps of what people need to do to get over that self-critic also.
Yeah. So to recognize, stop at mid thought, right? We are actually, I don't think that I realized this until I was focusing on what the inner critic does and what negative self talk does. We talk to ourselves all day, every day.
Yes. I forgot
And
what the percentage is, but it's an insane percentage of thoughts that go through our thought. We have thousands of thoughts every day. Like the amount of thoughts that we go through our head. I don't can't remember the number, but it's an insane a number of thoughts that travel through our brain on a daily basis. But go ahead. It's crazy.
yeah, no, it's true. And so if you think about how many opportunities there are to be positive there are a lot of opportunities to be positive also,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Instead of going to, oh gosh, that means I must be saying thousands of negative things to myself. So sometimes just stopping midway and just thinking, okay, wait, you know what? I did not get to the grocery store. These are really small and simple things. It's, I did not get to the grocery store. It's, or the dry cleaner, or I didn't get to run these 3 errands because work ran over, or I got that extra call, or whatever it is. But you know what? This person on my team really needed me to show up for them. So I'm really glad the groceries can wait. I'm really glad that I was able to do my job as a manager and help this person overcome this, because that's going to help
Right.
them, that's going to help our team, and I'll find another time to do the groceries, right? And
Right.
sometimes it's not that simple, but sometimes it truly is that simple.
Yes.
Instead of focusing on what I didn't do, let's focus on what I did do.
Right.
So you can stop those thoughts. You have thousands of opportunities every day to
Mhm.
stop those thoughts.
Yes.
It's just a question of really taking a minute to understand that those are the thoughts that are going through your head at
Right.
the time, right? Um, my daughter is applying for colleges, and so I could be like, "Oh gosh, she might find out later this week. What if she doesn't get it?" You know, all of that. Or I could be like, "You know what? Okay, what are the 3 things that I want to do? I probably she loves cookie cakes. Maybe we'll get her a cookie cake." It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what the outcome is. She's going to go to college. She's going to
Right.
be great. She's going to be successful, and it's not about me doing it. It's about how can I be there supporting her, right?
Yes.
So also changing that focus helps a lot. I'm not focused on my feelings. It's not about me. This is
Right.
not about me, right? This is about how I can be supporting somebody else or whatever. So showing up, I think, also helps, especially women. We love to show up for each other, right?
Yes.
So part of it's changing that narrative, part of it's changing that focus onto something else as well.
Yes.
And
I
then that
love
just
it.
being treating yourself like you would treat a friend.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Now tell us some of the services that you provide.
Sure. So I do a lot of individual coaching for women in the workforce who are oftentimes trying to get back into the workforce as well. So I relaunched my career after an 11-year career hiatus. So I know what it's like to go back to work and the challenges that you face. So
Right.
whether you've been in the workforce, you're new to the workforce, or you're going back into the workforce, or you're trying to move up the ladder, my clients are at all stages of their careers
Right.
and working with very different scenarios. Sometimes it's more business coaching along the lines of how do I manage my team better? How do I lead better? Sometimes it's more internal. I've got this inner critic. How can I help? And just being very tactical and very personable in terms of being able to provide different resources, but then also talking through whatever is top of mind for them. So I
Yeah.
do that on an individual basis, but then I also do group coaching, because what I've learned is oftentimes so I work with a law firm, for example. A lot of times they're dealing with a lot of the same challenges, and
Yeah.
hearing it from each other and supporting each other and showing up, especially now when we are in a space of hybrid work and we're not, I can't just pop over to your cubicle or your office and say, "Hey, Stacey, let's go grab a cup of coffee downstairs," or
Right.
something like that, right? That doesn't happen anymore. So that sisterhood, that feeling of community is lacking. And
Yeah.
so there are different ways that we can create that community, and that's by doing group coaching and having a safe space to talk about different topics. And then we decide as a group, what topics are we going to cover over, let's
Right.
say, a 6 week period or a 6 month period.
I like
And
that.
then I also do speaking engagements to talk about employee retention. A lot of what the work that I do is in helping women stay in the workforce,
Right.
and not keeping women in the workforce is detrimental in so many different ways,
Mm.
perspectives, and all the things, but it's also really detrimental to the bottom line of these
Yeah.
organizations. Hiring, onboarding, recruiting, all of that takes money and time and energy. And I think helping with professional development and showing that you value the people who work on your teams is really important. So a lot of this falls into that as well. So I do speaking engagements with associations and companies, organizations on how to work on employee retention.
I like that. I like that a lot. And also, where can people contact you?
Yeah. So my website is www.risingtideconsultingllc.com. My email is Raina at risingtideconsultingllc.com. And my Instagram is rising.tide.consulting. And so those are three great places to find me. Oh, and of course on LinkedIn. It's Raina and then B and then Gandhi. And it's right, if you look up Raina Gandhi and Rising Tide, you'll find it.
I love it. I love it. Well, this has been amazing. I love the fact that you brought up today being your own worst self critic, because that is something I think everyone struggles with. And it's something that's so vital that we need to overcome in order to be a success, in order to reach our true potential, in order to be the best version of ourselves. We need to overcome how to be our own worst self critic, because we have so many great qualities, but sometimes people just don't give themselves credit for all those qualities. And I think sometimes we need to focus on the great things about ourselves and feed off those strengths, and then just work on tweaking some of the things that maybe need to be tweaked, some of our weaknesses, but really focus on those positive things like you mentioned, to focus on the positive, which is I think really important. I think today you've really hit it right on the nail. I really love what you talked about today. And before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we go?
No, I think that's it. I'd just like to say thank you